Hello, and welcome to History in Twilight. Tonight, we begin with a question that has haunted humanity for over a century. What if the story of human civilization, the one written in every textbook, taught in every classroom, is incomplete? What if our ancestors weren't primitive cave dwellers, slowly discovering fire and the wheel, but students of something far older, far stranger? In 1872, a British museum assistant named George Smith made a discovery that would shake the foundations of history. Hidden in ancient clay tablets from Mesopotamia, he found a story of gods who descended from the heavens, gods who walked among humans, who taught them secrets, who shaped them with their own hands. The tablets called them the Anunnaki. Were they myths, symbols, or were they memories, written in clay, of something that actually happened? Before we begin this journey into the oldest mystery on Earth, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It's a wonderful way to support the channel, and it means the world to me. I'm also always curious, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments. Now, settle in. Dim the lights. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Tonight, we travel back 6,000 years, to the cradle of civilization, to the land between two rivers, where the story of humanity, or perhaps something beyond humanity, truly begins. Chapter 1. The Clay Tablets That Changed Everything. The story begins not in ancient Sumer, but in Victorian London. The year was 1872. The British Museum was a cathedral of empire, filled with plundered treasures from across the world. Among the dusty crates and forgotten relics were tens of thousands of clay tablets, broken fragments covered in wedge-shaped marks. Cuneiform, they called it. The oldest writing system known to man. Most of these tablets were inventories, receipts, records of grain and livestock. Boring, bureaucratic, the kind of thing that makes archaeologists yawn. But one young assistant, a self-taught genius named George Smith, believed there was more. He spent his days piecing together fragments, matching edges like a jigsaw puzzle made of ancient mud. And then, one cold November afternoon, he found it. It was a section of a much larger text, something epic, something profound. As Smith translated the symbols, his hands began to shake. The tablet told the story of a great flood, a man warned by the gods, a boat built to survive the deluge, animals taken aboard, 2 by 2, the waters rising, covering the earth. And when the flood receded, the man sent out birds to find dry land. Smith recognized it immediately. This wasn't just any flood story. This was the flood story, the one from the Bible, the story of Noah. Except this version was older, far older. It predated the Hebrew scriptures by over 1,000 years. The tablet wasn't Jewish. It wasn't Christian. It was Babylonian, part of a lost epic called the Tale of Gilgamesh. The implications were staggering. If the Bible's flood narrative wasn't original, if it was borrowed from an even older source, then what else had been borrowed? What other stories, what other truths lay buried in the rubble of forgotten cities? Smith's discovery made headlines across Europe. The Archbishop of Canterbury was reportedly furious. Scholars scrambled to understand what this meant for religion, for history, for everything they thought they knew. But Smith didn't stop. He returned to the tablets, obsessed, driven by a hunger to know more. And what he found would open a door that has never fully closed. The tablets came from the library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, who ruled in the 7th century before Christ. His palace at Nineveh, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq, had been a repository of knowledge. Ashurbanipal had ordered scribes to collect every text, every story, every piece of wisdom from across Mesopotamia. He wanted to preserve the knowledge of the ancients, the secrets of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. When the palace burned during the fall of Nineveh in 612 BC, the clay tablets were not destroyed. Fire hardens clay. It preserves it. And so, for over 2,000 years, these stories slept beneath the sand, waiting. The tablets spoke of gods. Not distant, abstract gods, but beings who lived among humans. Gods who had needs, desires, conflicts. Gods who descended from the sky in vehicles of fire and thunder. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, which translates roughly to those who from heaven to earth came. For decades, scholars treated these texts as mythology, colorful legends invented by primitive people trying to explain the unexplainable. Rain was the tears of the gods. Thunder was their anger. The sun was a chariot pulled across the sky. Metaphors, symbols, nothing more. But in 1976, a man named Zecharia Sitchin published a book that would ignite a controversy still burning today. The book was called The 12th Planet. Sitchin was not an archaeologist. He was a journalist and self-taught scholar of ancient languages, and his interpretation of the Sumerian tablets was radical, dangerous, and utterly captivating. Sitchin argued that the tablets were not myths at all. They were histories, literal accounts of real events. The Anunnaki, he claimed, were not gods. They were extraterrestrial beings, visitors from another planet who came to Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago. And they didn't just observe humanity, they created it. The academic world reacted with fury. Sitchin's translations were called flawed, his theories dismissed as pseudoscience. Assyriologists lined up to tear apart his work, pointing out errors in grammar, context, and interpretation. And yet, Sitchin's books sold millions of copies. They sparked a movement. Ancient astronaut theory exploded into popular culture, inspiring documentaries, television series, and endless debate. Why? Because Sitchin asked a question that scholars refuse to ask. What if the ancients meant exactly what they said? What if when the Sumerians wrote that gods came down from the sky, they weren't speaking in metaphor? What if they were describing something they actually saw? The clay tablets are real. The cities of Sumer are real. The knowledge contained in those texts, knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, architecture, is undeniably real. The question is not whether these things exist. The question is, where did they come from? George Smith died young, only 36 years old, during an expedition to find more tablets in the deserts of Syria. Some say he was driven mad by what he discovered. Others say he simply worked himself to death. But his legacy endured. The tablets he translated opened a window into the distant past, a past far stranger and more mysterious than anyone had imagined. And at the center of that mystery stand the Anunnaki, gods or aliens, myth or memory. Tonight, we will explore the evidence, the theories, the controversies. We will walk through the ruins of the first cities. We will read the words carved in clay 6,000 years ago, and we will ask the question that refuses to go away. Who were the Anunnaki, and why does their story still haunt us today? Chapter 2. Sumer, the first civilization's impossible beginning. Imagine standing in southern Iraq, in the flat, scorching desert between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The heat shimmers off the sand. There are no trees, no shade, no relief. This is one of the harshest environments on Earth. And yet, 6,000 years ago, this desolate place gave birth to the world's first civilization. We call it Sumer, and it appeared, seemingly overnight, with no warning, no precedent, and no clear explanation. This is the mystery that has puzzled historians for over a century. Civilizations are supposed to develop slowly. Humans learn to farm. Farming leads to surplus food. Surplus leads to villages. Villages grow into towns. Towns expand into cities. Writing emerges. Then government. Then art, science, and culture. This process takes thousands of years. It's gradual, evolutionary, traceable. Sumer didn't follow the rules. Around 3500 BC, the Sumerians appeared in Mesopotamia with a fully formed civilization. They had cities, not villages. They had monumental architecture, massive ziggurats made of millions of mud bricks. They had writing, not just simple symbols, but a complex script capable of recording language, law, literature, and mathematics. They had astronomy, tracking the movements of planets with astonishing precision. They had schools, courts, and a bureaucracy that managed irrigation, trade, and taxation. It was as if someone had pressed the fast-forward button on human development. Archaeologists have searched for the intermediate stages, the transitional phase, the evidence of slow growth, and they haven't found it. Before Sumer, the people of Mesopotamia were tribal nomads and simple farmers. After Sumer, they were building empires. The gap between the two is breathtaking. The Sumerians themselves offered an explanation. They said their knowledge came from the gods, specifically from a god named Enki, the lord of the earth and waters, the god of wisdom. According to the tablets, Enki taught humanity the arts of civilization. He gave them writing, mathematics, agriculture, and law. He was humanity's teacher, its benefactor, its divine patron. In Sumerian mythology, Enki is often depicted as a rebel, a trickster, a god who sided with humans against the harsher decrees of the other gods. He saved humanity from the Great Flood. He defied the assembly of the Anunnaki to protect his creation. He was, in many ways, the Prometheus of Mesopotamia. But here's where it gets interesting. The Sumerians didn't describe Enki as a distant, ethereal being. They described him as a physical entity. He lived in a temple. He ate food. He had children, both divine and human. And he traveled in a boat, not just on water, but through the sky. Let's pause for a moment and consider the sheer sophistication of early Sumerian knowledge. The Sumerians divided the year into 12 lunar months. They created the concept of the 60-minute hour and the 60-second minute, a system we still use today. They identified and named the planets, not just the ones visible to the naked eye, but all of them, including Uranus and Neptune, planets that modern science didn't rediscover until the invention of the telescope in the 18th and 19th centuries. How did the Sumerians know about planets that can't be seen without advanced optics? They also had an advanced understanding of medicine. Sumerian clay tablets describe surgeries, prescriptions, and diagnoses that wouldn't look out of place in a medieval or even early modern medical text. They knew about the human circulatory system, the function of organs, and the use of antiseptics. Their mathematics was equally impressive. The Sumerians used a base 60 numerical system, which is why we have 360 degrees in a circle and 60 seconds in a minute. They understood geometry, algebra, and even quadratic equations. Babylonian mathematicians, inheritors of Sumerian knowledge, were solving mathematical problems that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. In architecture, the Sumerians built ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids that served as temples. The largest, the ziggurat of Ur, was over 70 feet tall, built entirely of mud bricks, each one carefully shaped, dried, and laid with precision. These structures were aligned with celestial bodies, their corners pointing to the cardinal directions with near-perfect accuracy. And they did all of this without metal tools. They had copper, yes, but not bronze, not iron. They shaped stone with stone, moved massive blocks with rope and human labor, and somehow created architectural marvels that still stand, in ruins, today. So the question remains, where did this knowledge come from? The standard academic answer is that the Sumerians were simply genius innovators. They were in the right place at the right time, blessed with fertile land and abundant water from the two rivers. Necessity drove invention. They needed to manage irrigation, so they invented mathematics. They needed to record transactions, so they invented writing. Problem solved. But this answer feels incomplete. It doesn't explain the suddenness. It doesn't explain why no other civilization, facing similar challenges, made similar leaps. The Egyptians, the Indus Valley civilization, the Chinese, all of them developed over millennia, leaving behind clear archaeological evidence of their gradual progress. Sumer is different. Sumer is an anomaly. Zecharia Sitchin, and those who followed him, offered an alternative explanation. What if the Sumerians didn't invent their civilization? What if they were taught? What if Enki and the Anunnaki were not gods in the mythological sense, but advanced beings, visitors from elsewhere who shared their knowledge with early humans. This theory is controversial, to put it mildly. Mainstream scholars reject it outright. They argue that it robs humanity of its achievements, that it assumes ancient people were too stupid to innovate on their own, and there's truth to that concern. We should never underestimate human ingenuity, but the theory also asks a valid question. If the Sumerians were describing real events, real beings they encountered, what would those descriptions look like? Would they use the language of gods and miracles? Or would they use the only language they had, the language of myth and metaphor, to describe technology and knowledge they couldn't fully comprehend? When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, the Aztecs believed they were gods, descended from the sky in ships with wings. They described the Spaniards' armor as shining like the sun, their weapons as thundersticks that killed from a distance. Were the Aztecs stupid? No. They were using the only frame of reference they had to describe something utterly foreign. Could the Sumerians have been doing the same thing? In the ruins of Uruk, one of the greatest Sumerian cities, archaeologists found thousands of clay tablets. Many are administrative records, lists of goods, inventories of livestock. But others are literary. They tell stories. And one of the oldest stories ever written is the tale of Gilgamesh, the king who sought immortality, who traveled to meet the gods, who witnessed wonders beyond human understanding. In the epic, Gilgamesh journeys to the home of Utnapishtim, the man who survived the Great Flood. Utnapishtim describes how the god Enki warned him of the coming deluge, told him to build a boat, and saved him from annihilation. The story is eerily similar to the biblical account of Noah, but it's older, much older. Why do so many ancient cultures have flood stories? The Greeks, the Hindus, the Chinese, the Native Americans, all of them remember a time when the world was drowned. Is it coincidence? Collective myth-making? Or is it a memory, passed down through millennia, of an actual cataclysmic event? Sumer stands at the beginning of recorded history. It is the foundation upon which all later civilizations were built. Babylon inherited Sumer's knowledge. Assyria, Persia, Greece, Rome, all of them traced their intellectual lineage back to Mesopotamia. When we study mathematics, astronomy, law, and literature, we are studying the descendants of Sumerian thought. And yet, we still don't fully understand how it all began. The Sumerians left us a gift. They left us writing, and in that writing, they left us their story. A story of gods who came from the heavens, who taught humanity, who walked among us. Whether we interpret that story as myth or as memory, as religion or as history, it remains the same. The Anunnaki were here. At least, that's what the Sumerians believed. And they wrote it down, in clay, so that we, thousands of years later, would remember. The question is, do we believe them? Chapter 3. The Anunnaki, Gods from the Sky. The word Anunnaki appears hundreds of times in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts. It's not a metaphor. It's not a poetic flourish. It's a specific term for a specific group of beings. And the meaning of the word itself is revealing. In Sumerian, Anu means sky or heaven. Ki means earth. Anunnaki, depending on how you translate it, means either those who came from heaven to earth, or the offspring of Anu and Ki, the children of heaven and earth. Either way, the implication is the same. These beings originated somewhere else, somewhere above. The Anunnaki were not a single god. They were a pantheon, a complex hierarchy of divine beings with different roles, different personalities, different agendas. At the top sat Anu, the sky god, the father of the gods, the ultimate authority. He ruled from his celestial home, rarely descending to earth, but his word was law. Below Anu were his sons, Enlil and Enki. These two brothers were the most important figures in the Anunnaki pantheon, and their relationship defined much of Mesopotamian mythology. Enlil was the lord of the air, and storms, the commander, the enforcer. He was stern, authoritarian, and often harsh toward humanity. Enki, on the other hand, was the lord of water and wisdom, the craftsman, the teacher. He loved humanity, protected it, and often disobeyed his brother to save it. Then there was Ninmah, also called Ninhursag, the mother goddess, the lady of the mountain. She played a crucial role in the creation of humanity, working alongside Enki to shape the first humans. There were also Inanna, the goddess of love and war, Utu, the sun god, and dozens of others, each with their own temples, their own cities, their own followers. But here's what makes the Anunnaki different from the gods of later religions. They weren't omnipotent. They weren't omniscient. They weren't perfect. They argued. They made mistakes. They struggled. They formed councils, voted on decisions, and sometimes defied each other. They ate food. They drank beer. They had children, both with each other and with humans. In short, they behaved more like powerful, advanced beings than like the all-knowing, all-powerful gods of monotheistic religion. The texts describe the Anunnaki as physical entities. They wore garments that shone like the stars. They traveled in vehicles called mu, which were described as flying boats or celestial chambers. When they descended from the sky, the ground shook, fire and smoke poured from beneath them, and the noise was like thunder. One of the most detailed descriptions comes from the Epic of Etana, a story about a Sumerian king who flew to heaven on the back of an eagle. As Etana ascends, he describes the earth shrinking beneath him. The land becomes like a garden. The sea becomes like a pond. The higher he climbs, the smaller everything becomes, until the earth itself looks like a small ball floating in darkness. This is not the description of a primitive, flat earth civilization. This is the description of someone who understood that the earth was round, that it floated in space, and that altitude changed perspective. How did the Sumerians know this? The Anunnaki also had technology. The texts describe weapons that shot fire and light, tools that could cut through stone like butter, and devices that could heal the sick or extend life. Gilgamesh, in his quest for immortality, sought the secret of the gods, the plant or substance that would grant eternal youth. He found it, briefly, but lost it to a serpent. The story echoes through later myths, from the Garden of Eden to the Greek legends of ambrosia and nectar. One of the most intriguing tablets is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. It describes how the universe was formed, how the gods battled primordial chaos, and how Earth was created from the body of a defeated goddess named Tiamat. But buried in the poetic language are references to celestial bodies, to the formation of planets, to cosmic events that sound less like myth and more like astronomy. Zecharia Sitchin seized on these details. He argued that the Enuma Elish was not a creation myth, but a historical account of a collision between planets in our solar system. He believed that Tiamat was a planet that once existed between Mars and Jupiter, and that it was destroyed in a cosmic catastrophe, creating the asteroid belt. He claimed the Anunnaki came from a 12th planet, which he called NIBIRU, and that this planet's elliptical orbit brought it into the inner solar system every 3,600 years. Mainstream astronomers reject this theory entirely. There is no evidence of a 12th planet. The asteroid belt formed naturally, not from a planetary collision, and the orbits of the known planets show no signs of gravitational disruption from a massive, unseen body. But Sitchin's critics miss the larger point. Whether or not Nibiru exists, the Sumerians clearly had advanced astronomical knowledge. They knew the solar system had more than just the visible planets. They tracked the movements of celestial bodies with precision, and they described the Anunnaki as beings who traveled between worlds. The texts also describe the Anunnaki's arrival on Earth. According to the creation myths, the Anunnaki came to Earth in search of resources. Specifically, gold. They needed gold for reasons the texts don't fully explain, though Sitchin speculated it was used to repair their planet's atmosphere. The Anunnaki established mining operations, digging deep into the earth, extracting precious metals. But the work was hard, backbreaking, endless. The lower-ranking Anunnaki, the worker gods, grew tired. They complained. They rebelled. And so the leadership, Enlil and Enki, convened a council. They needed a solution. They needed workers. And Enki, the clever one, the scientist, proposed an idea. Why not create a new being? A creature that could do the work, that could serve the gods, that could ease their burden. A primitive worker, a slave race. And so, according to the tablets, the Anunnaki created humanity. This brings us to one of the most controversial and fascinating aspects of the Anunnaki story. The idea that humans were not the product of natural evolution, but of genetic engineering, of intelligent design. Not by a divine, omnipotent creator, but by flesh and blood beings with advanced technology. It's an idea that challenges everything we've been taught about our origins. And it's an idea that, for millions of people around the world, makes far more sense than the alternatives. The Anunnaki were not distant, abstract gods. They lived among humans. They ruled over cities. They chose kings. They waged wars. And when those wars turned catastrophic, when weapons of terrible power were unleashed, the gods themselves suffered. One of the most haunting passages in Mesopotamian literature describes the aftermath of the Great Flood. The goddess Ninmah weeps, mourning the destruction of humanity. She cries out, "How could I speak evil in the assembly of the gods? How could I order the destruction of my people?" The gods, it seems, were not unanimous in their decision to wipe out humanity. Some regretted it. Some grieved. These are not the actions of infallible deities. These are the actions of beings capable of error, of emotion, of change. Beings who, perhaps, were more like us than we care to admit. The Anunnaki left their mark on every civilization that followed. The gods of Babylon, Assyria, and Akkad were the Anunnaki under different names. When the Greeks encountered Mesopotamian mythology, they absorbed it, transforming Inanna into Aphrodite, Utu into Helios. The Romans did the same. Even the Bible, written centuries later, carries echoes of the Anunnaki story. In the book of Genesis, God says, "Let us make man in our image." Not, "Let me," "Let us," the plural. Who was God speaking to? Traditional theology says it's the royal we, or a reference to the Trinity. But others point to the Anunnaki, to the council of gods who, according to Sumerian texts, gathered to decide the fate of creation. And then there are the Nephilim, the mysterious giants mentioned in Genesis chapter 6. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives from among them. The offspring of these unions were the Nephilim, mighty men of old, men of renown. Who were the sons of God? The text doesn't say, but the description matches the Anunnaki, gods who mated with human women, producing hybrid offspring. The Anunnaki are not a modern invention. They are not a conspiracy theory cooked up by fringe writers. They are part of the oldest written records in human history. They were worshipped, feared, and remembered for thousands of years. The question is not whether the Anunnaki existed in the minds of the ancient Mesopotamians. They clearly did. The question is whether they existed in reality. Whether the stories carved into clay tablets 6,000 years ago are myths or memories. Chapter 4. The Tale of Human Creation. If the Anunnaki story ended with gods descending from the sky, it would be strange enough. But the story doesn't end there. It goes further, deeper, into territory that feels disturbingly modern. It tells the story of how humanity was created, and it doesn't describe a divine breath into dust. It describes something that sounds, unmistakably, like genetic engineering. The most complete account comes from a text called the Atrahasis Epic, written in Old Babylonian around 1700 BC, but based on much older Sumerian sources. The story begins with a labor dispute. The Anunnaki had been mining gold for thousands of years, and the worker gods, the Igigi, were exhausted. They had been digging in the earth, hauling ore, toiling endlessly, and they'd had enough. One day, the Igigi rebelled. They threw down their tools, set fire to their equipment, and marched to the house of Enlil, the commander of the gods. They surrounded his dwelling, chanting, demanding relief. Enlil was furious. He called for the other gods to assemble. The council convened. Anu, the king of the gods, asked what had caused this uprising. Enlil blamed the workers for insubordination, but the workers had a point. The labor was unbearable. It was Enki, the wise one, who proposed a solution. He said, "Let us create a primitive worker, a Lulu Amalu, to bear the yoke of the gods. Let this worker take on the labor, so the gods can rest." The council agreed, but how would this new creature be made? Enki outlined the process. He would take the essence, the genetic material, of an Anunnaki god and mix it with the essence of a primitive creature already living on Earth. This creature, which the texts call the ape-man or the wild man, was not human. It was something earlier, something less developed. Modern readers can't help but think of Homo erectus or Homo habilis, early hominids that lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. Enki said the new being would be made in the image of the gods. It would have intelligence, the ability to speak, to reason, to understand commands, but it would be mortal, limited, subservient. It would be a hybrid, part god, part animal, and it would serve the Anunnaki. The goddess Ninmah, the mother goddess, assisted Enki in the creation. The texts describe the process in unsettling detail. Blood was taken from a slain god, mixed with clay, and shaped into a form. But this wasn't literal clay. In Sumerian, the word for clay and the word for flesh share the same root. Clay was used as a metaphor for biological material, for the substance of life. The mixture was placed in a mold, or perhaps a vessel, and left to develop. After a period of time, the first humans emerged. 7 males and 7 females. They were called Lulu, the mixed ones. They were the prototype. But there was a problem. The first humans couldn't reproduce. They were sterile, like mules. Ninmah and Enki had to refine the process, adjusting the genetic mixture until the humans could breed on their own. Once that was achieved, humanity multiplied, spreading across the earth, taking on the labor the gods no longer wanted to perform. To modern ears, this sounds less like mythology and more like a science fiction novel. Or worse, like a description of cloning, genetic modification, laboratory creation. Critics dismiss it as coincidence, as ancient people imagining fantastical creation stories with no basis in reality. But the level of detail is remarkable. The text specifies that blood was needed. In ancient times, people had no concept of DNA, no understanding of genetics, yet the story insists that the essence of life, the information that defines a being, is carried in the blood. Today, we know that's essentially true. DNA is found in blood cells. The story also describes trial and error. Enki and Ninmah didn't succeed on the first try. They created failed versions, beings with deformities, beings that couldn't survive. Only after multiple attempts did they create a stable, functional human. This sounds less like divine magic and more like the messy, experimental process of science. And then there's the reason for creation. Humans were made to work, to serve, to be slaves. This is not a flattering origin story. It doesn't present humanity as the pinnacle of creation, beloved by a benevolent God. It presents humanity as a tool, a biological machine designed for labor. It's uncomfortable. And perhaps that's why it feels true. The parallels to the biblical story of Genesis are impossible to ignore. In Genesis, God creates Adam from the dust of the ground and breathes life into him. In the Atrahasis epic, the Anunnaki create humans from clay and blood. In Genesis, God creates Eve from Adam's rib. In the Sumerian texts, Ninmah extracts genetic material from a male to create a female. In Genesis, humans are expelled from the Garden of Eden for disobeying God. In the Mesopotamian texts, humans are punished for becoming too numerous, too noisy, too independent. The stories are not identical, but they share a skeleton. It's as if the biblical authors inherited the Mesopotamian tradition and adapted it, removing the polytheism, simplifying the narrative, but keeping the core structure. The Jewish people were exiled to Babylon in the 6th century BC. They lived among Mesopotamian culture, heard its stories, read its texts. When they returned to their homeland, they brought those stories with them, woven into their own religious identity. But the Sumerian version is older, and it's more detailed, and it asks a question that the Bible doesn't. If we were created by the gods, what does that make us? Are we their children, or their property? Do we have value in ourselves, or only as servants? The ancient Mesopotamians wrestled with this question. They built temples, made offerings, performed rituals, all to please the gods, to avoid their wrath. But they also told stories of rebellion. Gilgamesh, the greatest hero of Mesopotamian literature, was 2/3 god and 1/3 human. He defied the gods, challenged death, and sought immortality. He failed, but his defiance was celebrated. The Mesopotamians understood that to be human was to struggle against the limitations imposed by higher powers. Zecharia Sitchin took the creation story literally. He believed the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial scientists who genetically engineered Homo sapiens by splicing their own DNA with that of Homo erectus. He pointed to the sudden appearance of Homo sapiens around 200,000 years ago as evidence. Evolutionary biologists have struggled to explain why human intelligence evolved so rapidly, why we are so different from other primates, despite sharing 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees. Sitchin argued that the missing link wasn't missing. It was the Anunnaki. They accelerated human evolution, not through natural selection, but through direct intervention. Mainstream science rejects this entirely. Paleoanthropologists point to fossils, genetic evidence, and evolutionary theory to explain human origins. We didn't need aliens. We evolved naturally, through mutation, adaptation, and survival. The gaps in the fossil record are just that, gaps, not proof of intervention. But here's the uncomfortable truth. We still don't fully understand human consciousness. We don't know why we became self-aware, why we developed language, art, music, religion. We don't know why, around 50,000 years ago, human culture suddenly exploded, producing cave paintings, tools, burial rituals, all in a span of time that, evolutionarily speaking, is the blink of an eye. The Atrahasis epic offers an answer. We changed because we were changed. We became intelligent because intelligence was given to us, not by a supernatural god, but by beings with the knowledge and technology to alter our biology. It's a theory that makes many people uncomfortable. Some see it as undermining human achievement, others see it as blasphemous. But for those who take the ancient text seriously, it's not a theory. It's what the Sumerians themselves said happened, and they wrote it down, in detail, so we wouldn't forget. Chapter 5. NIBIRU, the mysterious 12th planet. One of the most controversial aspects of Zecharia Sitchin's work is his claim that the Anunnaki came from a planet called NIBIRU, not a planet in another star system, but a planet in our own solar system, a hidden world, orbiting far beyond the known planets, invisible to the naked eye, returning to the inner solar system only once every 3,600 years. Sitchin based this theory on his interpretation of ancient texts, particularly the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. The text describes a cosmic battle between gods, a collision that shaped the heavens. Sitchin argued that this wasn't mythology, it was astronomy disguised as myth. He believed the Sumerians were describing real celestial events, the formation of the solar system, the collision of planetary bodies, and the existence of a planet unknown to modern science. He pointed to Sumerian cylinder seals, small carved stones used to mark documents. One seal in particular, known as VA243, depicts a star surrounded by 11 spheres. Sitchin claimed this was a map of the solar system, with the star representing the sun and the spheres representing the planets. He counted them: Mercury, Venus, Earth, the Moon, treated as a planet, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and one more, a 12th body, NIBIRU. According to Sitchin, NIBIRU has an extremely elliptical orbit, bringing it close to Earth every 3,600 years. When it enters the inner solar system, its gravitational pull causes catastrophic events. earthquakes, floods, volcanic eruptions. And during these passes, the Anunnaki, who Sitchin claimed still live on Nibiru, return to Earth to check on their creation, to guide or punish humanity, to maintain their influence over our world. It's a grand, sweeping narrative, and it explains, in one stroke, the cyclical nature of ancient catastrophes, the periodic appearances of advanced knowledge in primitive societies, and the global legends of gods returning from the sky. But does it hold up? Modern astronomers have searched for Nibiru, or rather, they've searched for any evidence of a massive, undiscovered planet in the outer solar system. For decades, there were hints. Irregularities in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune suggested that something large was tugging on them, something we couldn't see. This led to the discovery of Pluto in 1930, but Pluto turned out to be too small to account for the perturbations. In the early 2000s, astronomers discovered several large objects beyond Neptune in a region called the Kuiper Belt. These were icy, distant worlds, dwarf planets like Eris and Makemake. Some speculated that a much larger planet, called Planet 9 or Planet X, might exist even farther out, 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting in the deep dark. But this hypothetical planet, if it exists, has an orbital period of 10,000 to 20,000 years, not 3,600, and it's never been observed. There is no evidence of Nibiru, no gravitational anomalies that can't be explained by known bodies. New photographs, new direct observations, new confirmed sightings. If a planet the size Sitchin described existed and passed through the inner solar system every 3,600 years, we would see its effects. Planetary orbits would be chaotic. The asteroid belt would be disrupted. Earth's climate would be devastated. And yet, the idea persists. Why? Because the ancient texts describe something. The Sumerians had names for celestial bodies that shouldn't have been visible without telescopes. They tracked planetary movements with extraordinary accuracy. They understood that Earth was a sphere, that it orbited the Sun, concepts that wouldn't be rediscovered in the West until Copernicus in the 16th century. Sitchin's critics point out that he mistranslated key words. The Sumerian word Nibiru doesn't mean planet. It means crossing point or ferry. In astronomical contexts, it likely referred to the point where planets cross the celestial equator, or to a specific star, possibly Jupiter or Mercury. Ancient scholars used the term differently in different texts, and Sitchin cherry-picked meanings that supported his theory. But translation is always interpretation. Languages, especially dead languages, are not precise. Words have multiple meanings depending on context. And the Sumerians themselves were not always consistent. Later, Babylonian and Assyrian scribes copied Sumerian texts, sometimes misunderstanding them, sometimes adding their own interpretations. What's undeniable is that the Mesopotamians believed in a celestial home of the gods. They believed the Anunnaki came from the sky, from a place among the stars. They built ziggurats, massive step towers, as symbolic mountains, staircases between heaven and earth. The architecture itself was designed to facilitate the descent of the gods. Sitchin also pointed to the number 3,600. It appears repeatedly in Mesopotamian king lists, in descriptions of divine reigns, in measurements of time and space. The Great Year, the precession of the equinoxes, takes roughly 26,000 years, but the ancient Mesopotamians divided it into smaller cycles, including a cycle of 3,600 years. Could this be a memory of Nibiru's return? A cosmic clock, ticking in the heavens, marking the arrival of the Anunnaki? Or is it simply numerology, a sacred number chosen for symbolic reasons, with no astronomical basis? The truth is, we don't know. Sitchin's theory remains unproven, rejected by mainstream science, yet embraced by millions who find it more compelling than the alternatives. The idea that we are not alone, that we never have been, that our creators still watch us from the darkness of space, is both terrifying and comforting. The search for Planet 9 continues. Astronomers scan the outer solar system, looking for anomalies, gravitational clues, anything that might reveal a hidden world. And every so often, there's a flicker of hope, a strange orbit, an unexplained perturbation, a hint that something is out there, unseen, waiting. NIBIRU may not exist, but the mystery it represents, the possibility that our solar system still holds secrets, that the ancients knew things we've forgotten, that remains very real. And as long as that mystery endures, the legend of NIBIRU will endure with it. Chapter 6. The evidence they left behind. The ancient texts tell one story, but texts can be disputed, mistranslated, misinterpreted. What cannot be argued with is stone. Massive, impossible stone, carved with precision that shouldn't exist, moved by methods we still don't understand, aligned with astronomical accuracy that requires advanced knowledge. Across the world, scattered like breadcrumbs left by giants, are structures that defy explanation. Not just impressive structures, impossible structures. Buildings that challenge everything we think we know about ancient technology, ancient capabilities, ancient humanity. Let's begin in Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built, we're told, around 2500 BC as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu. It stands 480 feet tall, composed of approximately 2.5 million limestone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 70 tons. The largest granite blocks in the king's chamber weigh over 50 tons and were somehow lifted to a height of over 150 feet. The pyramid is aligned almost perfectly with true north, accurate to within 1/15 of a degree. This level of precision requires sophisticated surveying instruments and astronomical knowledge. The base is nearly perfectly level, with a deviation of less than 1 inch across its 750-foot width. The blocks are fitted together so tightly that you cannot slide a razor blade between them. The official explanation is that the Egyptians built this using copper tools, wooden sledges, and tens of thousands of workers pulling blocks up ramps. But here's the problem. No one has successfully demonstrated how this could be done. Modern engineers, using modern equipment, struggle to replicate the precision of the Great Pyramid. The idea that Bronze Age workers achieved this with rope and copper seems, to put it gently, optimistic, and Egypt is just the beginning. In Lebanon, at a place called Baalbek, stand the ruins of a Roman temple complex. But underneath the Roman construction is something far older, far stranger. 3 massive stone blocks, called the trilithon, each weighing approximately 800 tons. 800 tons. That's roughly 1.6 million pounds per block. Nearby, still in the quarry, is an even larger stone, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing an estimated 1,000 tons. No crane in the ancient world could have lifted these stones. No crane in the modern world could have lifted them either, not until very recently. And yet, there they are, fitted perfectly into a foundation wall, positioned with laser-like precision. The Romans built on top of them, but they didn't move them. They couldn't. Even the Romans, master engineers, looked at these stones and knew they were dealing with something beyond their capability. Local legend says the stones were placed there before the flood, by giants, by beings of immense power. The Arabs called Baalbek the fortress of the sky. They believed it was built by the gods. Move across the world to Peru. High in the Andes Mountains, at an altitude of over 12,000 feet, lies Pumapunku, part of the Tiwanaku complex. This site dates back, conservatively, to around 500 AD, though some researchers argue it's far older. The stone blocks at Pumapunku are not simply large. They are precisely machined. The blocks feature perfectly flat surfaces, straight edges, and drill holes so uniform they appear to have been made with modern equipment. Some blocks have interlocking joints, complex three-dimensional puzzles that fit together with millimeter precision. The stone is andesite and diorite, some of the hardest rock on Earth, ranking 8 to 9 on the Mohs hardness scale. You cannot shape this stone with copper or bronze. You need steel or diamond-tipped tools. And yet, the Tiwanaku people, according to mainstream archaeology, had neither. They were a pre-Columbian culture with no written language, no wheel, no iron. And somehow, they created architectural elements that looked like they came from a modern machine shop. Engineers have examined the cuts, the angles, the drill holes. They've concluded that the tolerances are too tight for hand tools. The precision is too consistent. Something else was used. But what? Then there's Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. This site rewrote everything we thought we knew about the Neolithic period. Discovered in the 1990s, it dates back to approximately 9600 BC. That's 11,600 years ago. This is before the invention of agriculture, before pottery, before metal tools, before civilization as we understand it. And yet, Göbekli Tepe is a massive complex of stone pillars, arranged in circles, each pillar weighing up to 20 tons, carved with intricate reliefs of animals, symbols, and geometric patterns. The builders quarried, transported, shaped, and erected these stones using nothing but stone tools. At least, that's the official story. But here's the mystery. Hunter-gatherers are not supposed to build monuments. They're supposed to be nomadic, scattered, focused on survival. The construction of Göbekli Tepe would have required organization, planning, a large labor force, and a reason. Why would people who had never farmed, never settled, suddenly decide to build something like this? Some researchers suggest it was a religious site, a temple. But that raises another question. Why does religion, organized religion, appear before civilization? The standard narrative says civilization leads to religion. Göbekli Tepe suggests it was the other way around. Something inspired these people to build. Something gave them a reason to gather, to work together, to create something permanent. And then, after thousands of years, they buried it, deliberately. They filled in the entire complex with dirt, preserving it, hiding it, as if they wanted to ensure it would survive for someone in the future to find. The precision of ancient construction appears everywhere. In Egypt, the stone boxes in the Serapeum of Saqqara, granite sarcophagi weighing up to 100 tons, polished to a mirror finish, with perfectly flat interior surfaces. In Peru, the polygonal walls of Cusco and Sacsayhuaman, where stones with dozens of angles fit together like organic puzzle pieces, no two alike, yet perfectly joined. In Bolivia, the H-blocks of Puma Punku, with notches and grooves cut to tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter. In Easter Island, the Moai statues, carved from volcanic tuff, transported across the island, erected on platforms, some weighing over 80 tons. The islanders have legends that say the statues walked to their locations, moved by the mana, the power, of the gods. Mainstream archaeology attributes all of this to human ingenuity, determination, and time. Given enough workers and enough years, anything is possible. And that's true. Humans are capable of extraordinary things. But the precision, the scale, the consistency across cultures that had no contact with each other, it all suggests something more. Ancient astronaut theorists point to these sites as evidence of intervention. If the Anunnaki, or beings like them, visited Earth in the distant past, if they taught humanity, guided it, even genetically altered it, then these monuments could be the remnants of that interaction, not built by the gods, but built with the knowledge and tools the gods provided. There's also the matter of ancient maps. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, shows the coastline of Antarctica with remarkable accuracy. But Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820, and it wasn't fully mapped until the 20th century. Even stranger, the map shows the coastline as it would appear without ice, suggesting the continent was mapped before it froze over, which would place the original survey at least 6,000 years ago, possibly much older. How is that possible? Admiral Piri Reis himself claimed he based his map on older sources, ancient charts from the Library of Alexandria and other lost archives. But who made those original maps? Who surveyed Antarctica when it was ice-free? Then there's the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece in 1901. It's a bronze device, over 2,000 years old, containing a complex system of gears, dials, and inscriptions. For decades, no one knew what it was. Then, using X-ray technology, researchers discovered it was an astronomical calculator, capable of predicting eclipses, tracking planetary movements, and modeling the irregular orbit of the moon. It's the most sophisticated mechanical device known from the ancient world. Nothing even close to its complexity appears again until the 14th century. It's as if someone in ancient Greece had access to knowledge and engineering skills far beyond their time. The device suggests an unbroken chain of scientific knowledge stretching back into prehistory, knowledge that was mostly lost, but occasionally surfaced in isolated examples like this. Skeptics argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and they're right, but the evidence is there. It's carved in stone. It's measured in degrees of alignment. It's visible in satellite imagery. These structures exist. The precision exists. The knowledge exists. The question is not whether ancient people were capable of great things. They were. The question is whether they had help, whether the knowledge that allowed them to build these impossible monuments came from within or from without. The Sumerians said it came from the Anunnaki. The Egyptians said it came from the gods who ruled before the pharaohs. The Incas said it came from Viracocha, the bearded god who brought civilization. The Maya said it came from Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who descended from the sky. Different names, different cultures, different continents. But the same story. The gods came down. They taught us, they left, and they promised to return. The stones are still here, waiting, remembering. Chapter 7. The Great Flood and the Watchers. Of all the stories shared by ancient cultures, one stands above the rest in its ubiquity, its power, its terror. The story of the flood, the deluge, the end of the world by water. Every civilization has a version. The Mesopotamians, the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Hindus, the Chinese, the Aztecs, the Maya, the Aboriginal Australians, the Native American tribes. From every corner of the earth, from cultures separated by oceans and millennia, comes the same memory. Once, long ago, the world was drowned. Almost everything died, but a few survived, warned by the gods, saved in boats, chosen to begin again. The Epic of Gilgamesh contains the oldest written version. In the story, Gilgamesh, seeking immortality, journeys to meet Utnapishtim, the man who survived the Great Flood. Utnapishtim tells him what happened. The gods, disturbed by the noise and chaos of humanity, decided to wipe out the human race. But Enki, the god of wisdom, defied the council. He warned Utnapishtim in secret, speaking to him through the wall of a reed house. Enki told him to tear down his house and build a boat. A massive boat, sealed with pitch, strong enough to withstand the coming storm. He instructed him to bring aboard his family, his servants, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things, animals, birds, everything. Utnapishtim obeyed. He built the boat, and when the rains came, the storm was beyond description. The texts say the gods themselves were terrified. The deluge was so catastrophic that even the divine beings fled to the highest heavens, cowering like dogs. For 6 days and 6 nights, the storm raged. The waters rose, covering the mountains, drowning the world. When it finally stopped, Utnapishtim's boat came to rest on a mountain peak. He sent out birds to search for dry land. First a dove, which returned. Then a swallow, which returned. Finally, a raven, which did not return, meaning it had found land. The gods, realizing what they had done, regretted the destruction. Ninmah wept. Enki confronted Enlil, accusing him of acting rashly, without wisdom. But the damage was done. Humanity had nearly been erased. Only Utnapishtim and those on his boat survived. The gods granted him immortality as compensation, a gift no other human would receive. This story predates the biblical account by at least 1,000 years. When the book of Genesis was written, the authors were almost certainly aware of the Mesopotamian flood tradition. The parallels are too close to be coincidental. Noah's Ark, the warning from God, the animals brought aboard, the dove and the raven, the mountain landing, it's the same story, adapted for a monotheistic framework. But the flood narrative isn't unique to Mesopotamia and the Bible. In Hindu scripture, The Matsya Purana tells of Manu, the first man, who was warned by a fish, an avatar of the god Vishnu, that a great flood was coming. Manu built a boat, saved the seeds of life, and survived the deluge. In Greek mythology, Zeus flooded the world to punish humanity's wickedness, but Deucalion, warned by his father Prometheus, built an ark and survived. In China, the legend of Gun Yu tells of a catastrophic flood that covered the world. The hero Yu spent years controlling the waters, channeling them into rivers and seas, saving civilization. In Aztec mythology, the world has been destroyed and recreated multiple times, and one of those destructions was by water when the sky collapsed and the earth was submerged. Why does this story appear everywhere? Mainstream scholars argue it's a natural result of living near water. Rivers flood. Coastlines are hit by tsunamis. Cultures that depend on water for survival inevitably develop flood myths. It's coincidence, amplified by the fact that humans tend to settle near water, so flood stories are common. But this explanation feels insufficient. These are not local flood stories. They describe a global cataclysm. Waters covering mountains. The entire world submerged. Every living thing destroyed except for a chosen few. Geologists have searched for evidence of such an event, and they've found something. Around 11,600 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, there was a dramatic and rapid change in global climate. Temperatures rose sharply. Ice sheets covering North America and Europe melted. Sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, drowning coastal areas where humans had settled. This event, called Meltwater Pulse 1b, happened quickly, perhaps over just a few centuries. For people living in low-lying areas, it would have been catastrophic. Entire coastlines vanished. Islands were swallowed. Cities, if they existed, were submerged. The survivors would have passed down stories of the waters rising, of losing their homes, of the world being reshaped by the flood. But there's more to the story. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text not included in the Bible, but preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, tells a different version of the flood. According to Enoch, the flood was not just punishment for human sin. It was punishment for the sins of the Watchers. The Watchers were angels, heavenly beings sent to earth to observe and guide humanity. But they broke their sacred duty. They saw that human women were beautiful, and they descended, taking wives from among them. The offspring of these unions were the Nephilim, giants, beings of immense strength and violence, who corrupted the earth. The Watchers also taught forbidden knowledge. They taught men how to make weapons, how to wage war. They taught women the art of cosmetics and seduction. They taught humanity astrology, the secrets of the heavens, things that were meant to remain hidden. This knowledge, the text says, led to chaos, to pride, to destruction. God, seeing the corruption spreading across the earth, decided to cleanse it. The flood was not random. It was targeted. It was meant to wipe out the Nephilim, the hybrids, the abominations born of the union between divine and human. The Watchers were punished, bound in darkness until the day of judgment. Humanity, though nearly erased, was allowed to continue, but without the forbidden knowledge, without the influence of the fallen angels. Does this sound familiar? The Anunnaki descending from the sky, the gods mating with human women, hybrid offspring, forbidden knowledge given to humanity, a decision by the divine council to destroy the corrupted world by flood. One god, Enki or Enoch, defying the others to save a remnant. The story is the same. The names change, the details shift, but the structure remains. Something happened. Beings from above came down. They interfered with humanity. The result was catastrophic, and the world had to be cleansed. Zecharia Sitchin argued that the flood was real, but not supernatural. He believed it was caused by the passage of NIBIRU through the inner solar system. The gravitational pull of this massive planet disrupted Earth's ice caps, causing them to collapse into the ocean, triggering a global tsunami. The Anunnaki, knowing this was coming, chose not to warn humanity. Enlil wanted the human population reduced. But Enki, loyal to his creation, secretly warned Utnapishtim. ensuring that humanity would survive. Mainstream science doesn't support the NIBIRU theory, but it does support the reality of massive flooding at the end of the Ice Age. Underwater archaeology has revealed submerged settlements, ancient coastlines now hundreds of feet below sea level, evidence of civilizations that existed before the flood and were lost to it. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, divers have found stone structures, walls and foundations submerged in the Arabian Sea. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument, a massive stone formation with carved steps and terraces, sits beneath the waves. In the Mediterranean, entire cities have been discovered underwater, drowned when sea levels rose. Could there have been a global civilization before the flood? A civilization advanced enough to build monuments, to understand astronomy, to chart the world. A civilization that was destroyed, leaving only scattered survivors, scattered knowledge, and scattered memories preserved in myth. Graham Hancock has argued exactly this. He believes there was a lost civilization, a mother culture, that existed during the Ice Age. When the ice melted and the floods came, this civilization was destroyed. But its survivors spread across the world, carrying their knowledge to Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, the Americas, teaching the primitive tribes they encountered, jump-starting the civilizations we know. This would explain why advanced knowledge appears suddenly in different places, why the Sumerians had astronomy, why the Egyptians built pyramids, why cultures around the world share similar myths. They were all taught by the same source, the survivors of the flood. And who were these survivors? Were they human? Or were they the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the gods who refused to let their creation die? The flood is not just a story, it's a memory of when the world changed, when the old world drowned, and the new world began. And at the center of that memory is a warning. The gods were here. They left, but the waters remember. Chapter 8. Ancient Astronaut Theory, the Modern Interpretation. The idea that extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in ancient times is not new, but it exploded into global consciousness in 1968 with the publication of a single book, Chariots of the Gods, written by Swiss author Erich von Däniken, became an international sensation, selling millions of copies and sparking a cultural movement that continues today. Von Däniken's thesis was simple, provocative, and impossible to ignore. He argued that many of the great mysteries of ancient history, the pyramids, the Nazca Lines, the Easter Island statues, could not be explained by conventional archaeology. Instead, he proposed that ancient humans had been visited by advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. These visitors were mistaken for gods, worshipped, and immortalized in myths and monuments. He asked questions that resonated with readers. How did ancient Egyptians move blocks weighing 70 tons? Why are the Nazca Lines, massive geoglyphs carved into the Peruvian desert, only fully visible from the air? Why do ancient carvings depict figures in what look like spacesuits and helmets? Why do cultures around the world have stories of gods descending from the sky in fiery chariots? Von Däniken wasn't the first to propose these ideas. Earlier writers like Robert Charroux and W. Raymond Drake had explored similar territory. But von Däniken's book struck a nerve. It arrived at the perfect moment. The 1960s were a time of space exploration, moon landings, and Cold War optimism about technology. People were looking up, wondering what else was out there. And von Däniken suggested that the answer had been here all along, carved in stone by our ancestors. Critics attacked him immediately. Archaeologists accused him of cherry-picking evidence, misrepresenting facts, and insulting ancient peoples by suggesting they couldn't have achieved their accomplishments without help. They pointed out errors in his translations, misunderstandings of historical context, and leaps of logic that bordered on fantasy. But von Däniken didn't need academic approval. He had something more powerful, the public's imagination. His book tapped into a deep, almost primal feeling that the official story of human history was incomplete, that there were mysteries being ignored, questions being suppressed, truths being hidden. In the decades that followed, others built on von Daniken's work. Zechariah Sitchin brought the Sumerian tablets into the conversation, offering a detailed narrative of the Anunnaki. Graham Hancock focused on lost civilizations and ancient knowledge, arguing for a sophisticated global culture that existed before recorded history. Robert Temple wrote The Sirius Mystery, exploring the Dogon tribe of Mali, whose mythology contained detailed knowledge of the Sirius star system, including the existence of a companion star, Sirius B, which is invisible to the naked eye. The Dogon, Temple argued, could not have known about Sirius B without advanced astronomical tools. So where did their knowledge come from? According to their own legends, they were taught by the Nommo, amphibious beings, who descended from the sky in a great vessel, bringing wisdom and civilization. Ancient astronaut theory also pointed to artwork. In temples, caves, and tombs around the world, there are carvings and paintings that seem to depict modern technology. In the Temple of Seti, the first at Abydos in Egypt, there's a carving that, to modern eyes, looks like helicopters, submarines, and airplanes. Mainstream Egyptologists explain this as a palimpsest, an accidental overlap of different hieroglyphs. But to ancient astronaut theorists, it's evidence that ancient Egyptians witnessed flying machines. In Colombia, gold artifacts from the pre-Columbian Tolima culture depict what looked like airplanes, complete with wings, stabilizers, and fuselages. Archaeologists call them stylized birds or insects. But aeronautical engineers have examined them and noted that the designs are more consistent with aircraft than with any known biological creature. Some have even built scale models and found that they fly. Then there are the Vimanas, flying machines described in ancient Sanskrit texts like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. These texts describe aerial battles, weapons of devastating power, and vehicles that could travel through the air and even into space. They describe the construction of these machines, the fuels they used, the weapons they carried. For centuries, scholars dismissed these descriptions as poetic exaggeration, as mythological fantasy. But after the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, some researchers noticed disturbing parallels. The ancient texts describe weapons that emit blinding light, that generate immense heat, that create mushroom-shaped clouds, that poison the land and cause hair and nails to fall out. These are descriptions of radiation sickness, of nuclear weapons, written thousands of years before such things should have been possible. In the biblical book of Ezekiel, the prophet describes a vision of a vehicle descending from the sky. He describes wheels within wheels, beings of fire, a throne of sapphire, and a voice speaking from the heavens. For centuries, this was interpreted as a mystical vision of God. But in 1973, NASA engineer Joseph Blumrich decided to prove the ancient astronaut theorists wrong. He analyzed Ezekiel's description using modern engineering principles. And to his shock, he found that the description was consistent with a spacecraft, complete with landing gear, propulsion systems, and rotating components. He even designed a working model based on Ezekiel's account and published his findings in a book called The Spaceships of Ezekiel. The theory also addresses the cargo cult phenomenon. In the 20th century, during World War II, isolated tribes in the Pacific Islands encountered American and Japanese military forces for the first time. They saw planes landing, bringing food, supplies, and technology. After the war, when the planes stopped coming, some tribes built crude replicas of airplanes out of wood and straw. They cleared runways in the jungle. They performed rituals, hoping the sky gods would return with their cargo. This is a documented, observable example of how primitive people interpret advanced technology as divine. If this happened in the 20th century, ancient astronaut theorists ask, why couldn't it have happened in ancient times? If the Anunnaki arrived in spacecraft, if they wore advanced suits, if they wielded powerful tools, wouldn't ancient humans have seen them as gods? The theory doesn't claim that all ancient achievements were the work of aliens. It claims that ancient humans were guided, taught, inspired by visitors who possessed knowledge far beyond what should have been available. It suggests that the sudden leaps in human development, the appearance of agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, were not random accidents of evolution, but the result of intervention. And it asks a question that mainstream archaeology refuses to seriously consider. What if the myths are true? Not symbolically true, literally true. What if the gods were real, just not the kind of gods we expect? Ancient astronaut theory has been criticized, ridiculed, debunked, and dismissed. But it has also inspired millions of people to question, to research, to explore. It has forced archaeologists to reconsider assumptions, to look more closely at anomalies, to admit that there are things we don't yet understand. The theory may not be perfect. It may not be provable, but it refuses to accept easy answers. It refuses to dismiss the possibility that our history is stranger, deeper, and more mysterious than we've been taught. And in a world where governments are now admitting that UFOs are real, where credible witnesses describe encounters with technology that defies physics, where the Pentagon releases footage of objects moving in ways that shouldn't be possible, the idea that we've been visited before doesn't seem quite so crazy anymore. The ancients said the gods came from the sky. Modern witnesses say the same thing. Perhaps the only difference is that we now call them something else. Chapter 9. The Skeptics' Case. For every claim made by ancient astronaut theorists, there is a scholar ready to tear it apart. And they have a point. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The burden of proof lies with those proposing radical theories, not with those defending the established narrative. So let's be fair. Let's hear what the skeptics have to say. The most vocal academic critic of Zecharia Sitchin was Dr. Michael Heiser, a scholar with a PhD in Hebrew Bible and ancient Semitic languages. Heiser dedicated years to dissecting Sitchin's work, and his conclusions were damning. He argued that Sitchin's translations of Sumerian and Akkadian texts were fundamentally flawed, that he mistranslated words, ignored context, and invented meanings that suited his theories. Heiser pointed out that the Sumerian word Anunnaki doesn't mean those who from heaven to earth came. It more accurately translates to princely offspring or descendants of Anu. The gods were called Anunnaki because they were the children of the sky god Anu, not because they literally traveled from the sky. It's a title, a family designation, not a travel itinerary. Heiser also challenged Sitchin's interpretation of the word NIBIRU. As we discussed earlier, NIBIRU doesn't mean planet in the way modern astronomy defines it. In ancient texts, it refers to a crossing point, a celestial marker, often identified with Jupiter or a specific star. Sitchin took a term with multiple contextual meanings and locked it into a single, literal interpretation that fit his narrative. Then there's the cylinder seal, VA243, which Sitchin claimed depicted the solar system with 12 bodies, including Nibiru. Experts who study cylinder seals say this is a misinterpretation. The seal shows a star symbol, likely representing a god or the sun, surrounded by dots that could represent anything, other gods, constellations, symbolic elements. There's no evidence it's a map of the solar system. Ancient Mesopotamians didn't create astronomical diagrams on administrative seals. That's not how their iconography worked. Heiser and other scholars argue that Sitchin cherry-picked evidence, reading ancient texts through a modern lens, imposing 21st century concepts onto Bronze Age literature. The Sumerians didn't think like us. Their worldview was mythological, symbolic, layered with meaning that can't be reduced to literal spaceflight and genetic engineering. But the skepticism goes beyond Sitchin. It extends to the entire framework of ancient astronaut theory. Mainstream archaeologists argue that attributing ancient achievements to aliens is not just wrong, it's insulting. It assumes that ancient people, our ancestors, were too primitive, too stupid to accomplish great things on their own. It robs them of credit for their ingenuity, their creativity, their determination. Consider the pyramids. Yes, they're massive. Yes, they're precise. But we know how they were built. Archaeologists have found quarries, ramps, tools, worker villages, even payroll records. The Egyptians didn't need aliens. They needed organization, mathematics, and a lot of time. Experiments have shown that blocks can be moved using sledges, rollers, and water to reduce friction. The precision of the construction is impressive, but not impossible. The same applies to other ancient sites. Baalbek's massive stones could have been moved using levers, rollers, and hundreds of workers. Pumapunku's precision could have been achieved with patience, measurement, and stone tools harder than the blocks being shaped. Göbekli Tepe could have been built by organized hunter-gatherers, motivated by religious fervor, not alien instruction. Skeptics also point to Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. What requires fewer assumptions, that ancient humans were clever and hard-working, or that extraterrestrial beings traveled light years across space, genetically engineered humanity, taught us civilization, and then left, leaving behind only ambiguous myths and massive stones. From a scientific perspective, the alien hypothesis creates more questions than it answers. Where did these aliens come from? How did they travel? Why did they come to Earth? Why did they leave? Why is there no definitive physical evidence, no alien artifacts, no spacecraft wreckage, no skeletal remains, nothing that can be tested and verified? Ancient astronaut theorists respond by pointing to the evidence they believe does exist: the stones, the texts, the artwork, the myths. But skeptics counter that all of this can be explained through natural, human means. Myths are not history. They're stories shaped by culture, religion, and imagination. Precision stonework is impressive, but not impossible. Ancient people were smarter than we give them credit for. Then there's the issue of consistency. If aliens visited Earth and shared advanced knowledge, why didn't that knowledge spread evenly? Why did some cultures develop writing while others didn't? Why did some build monuments while others remain nomadic? Why were the Americas isolated from Eurasian developments for thousands of years? If aliens were teachers, they were remarkably selective and inconsistent. Skeptics also challenge the timeline. Humans evolved over millions of years. Our ancestors used stone tools for hundreds of thousands of years before developing agriculture. The archaeological record shows gradual progress, not sudden leaps. Yes, there are gaps, but gaps are expected. Fossils are rare. Organic materials decay. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And what about DNA? If the Anunnaki genetically engineered humans, where's the proof? We've sequenced the human genome. We've compared it to other primates. We can trace our evolutionary lineage back through time. There's no alien DNA, no genetic markers that can't be explained through natural evolution. We share ancestors with chimpanzees, gorillas, and other apes. We didn't come from the stars. We came from the trees. Michael Shermer, a prominent skeptic and founder of the Skeptics Society, argues that ancient astronaut theory thrives because it offers simple answers to complex questions. People don't like uncertainty. They don't like saying, "We don't know." It's more satisfying to believe in a grand narrative, a hidden truth, a conspiracy, and ancient astronaut theory provides that. It turns mysteries into revelations. Shermer also points out that the theory has a troubling history. In the early 20th century, some European scholars used similar logic to deny that African and Asian civilizations could have built their own monuments. They attributed Great Zimbabwe to Phoenicians, the pyramids to lost white races, anything to avoid admitting that non-European peoples were capable of greatness. Ancient astronaut theory, intentionally or not, echoes this bias. Instead of aliens, maybe we should just credit the humans who actually did the work. But here's where the skeptics' case weakens. Their right to demand evidence. Their right to challenge sloppy translations and wild speculation. But they often dismiss questions that deserve serious investigation. Why do so many cultures have flood myths? Why does advanced astronomical knowledge appear in ancient texts? Why are some ancient structures still difficult to replicate with modern technology? Mainstream archaeology has made tremendous progress in understanding the past, but it doesn't have all the answers. And sometimes, in its rush to defend the consensus, it dismisses anomalies too quickly, labels uncomfortable questions as pseudoscience, and refuses to engage with alternative theories in good faith. The truth is, we don't know everything about the ancient world. We don't fully understand how some monuments were built. We don't know why certain knowledge appeared when it did. We don't have a complete picture of human prehistory, and that's okay. Mystery is not the enemy of science. Mystery is the starting point. The skeptics are right to be skeptical, but they shouldn't be so confident that they close the door on possibility. Because history has a habit of surprising us. Things we thought were myths turn out to be real. Troy was a myth until it was excavated. The Epic of Gilgamesh was a story until the tablets were found. The Americas were unreachable until we discovered Viking settlements predating Columbus. So maybe the Anunnaki are myth. Maybe ancient astronaut theory is wrong. But maybe, just maybe, there's something to the story. Something we haven't figured out yet. Something waiting to be discovered. And that's why the debate continues. Not because one side has won, but because the mystery endures. Chapter 10. Modern Connections and Lingering Mysteries. The Anunnaki story doesn't end in ancient Mesopotamia. It echoes through history, surfacing in unexpected places, connecting to modern mysteries in ways that are impossible to ignore. If we pull on the thread, it leads us not into the past, but into the present. And the questions it raises are more urgent than ever. Let's start with the Sumerian king list, one of the most bizarre documents from the ancient world. Carved in cuneiform on clay tablets and stone prisms, the king list chronicles the rulers of Sumer from the beginning of kingship until the early 2nd millennium BC. It's a historical record used by scholars to date dynasties and verify archaeological findings. But the early part of the list is strange. Very strange. The text states that kingship descended from heaven after the flood. Before the flood, it says, kings ruled for impossibly long periods. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, reigned for 28,800 years. The second, Alalja, reigned for 36,000 years. 8 kings in total ruled before the flood, and their combined reigns totaled 241,200 years. After the flood, the reigns become shorter, but still superhuman. Kings ruled for hundreds or thousands of years, gradually decreasing until, by the historical period, the lengths become realistic, matching what we know from other sources. Mainstream scholars treat the pre-flood section as mythological, symbolic numbers representing legendary times before recorded history. But the list doesn't read like myth. It reads like a chronicle, matter of fact, listing names, cities, and reign lengths as if they were real. The post-flood kings are historically verified. Why would the scribes mix myth and history in the same document without distinguishing between them? Ancient astronaut theorists point to the king list as evidence that the Anunnaki lived far longer than humans. If the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial or genetically advanced, their lifespans could have been vastly extended, measured in thousands of years rather than decades. The kings who ruled before the flood may have been Anunnaki themselves, or hybrids, part god and part human, with extended lives. This connects to another mystery, the sudden leap in human consciousness. Around 50,000 years ago, something changed. Anatomically modern humans had existed for over 150,000 years, but they behaved much like other animals. They used simple tools, lived in small groups, left no art, no symbols, no evidence of abstract thought. Then, suddenly, everything exploded. Humans began creating cave paintings, carving figurines, making jewelry, burying their dead with ritual, developing language, and spreading rapidly across the globe. This is called the Great Leap Forward, or the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, and no one knows why it happened. Evolutionarily speaking, 50,000 years is a blink. There's no significant change in human anatomy during this period. Our brains didn't suddenly get bigger. Our bodies didn't change. But our behavior transformed completely. It's as if a switch was flipped, turning us from animals into something else. Into us. What caused it? The standard explanation is that a genetic mutation improved our cognitive abilities, allowing symbolic thought and complex language. But there's no evidence of such a mutation, no genetic marker that appears 50,000 years ago. It's a hypothesis, not a fact. Ancient astronaut theorists offer a different explanation. What if the change wasn't biological? What if it was educational? What if the Anunnaki, or beings like them, intervened around this time, teaching early humans, guiding them, altering them. The sudden appearance of art, ritual, and technology could be the result of contact, not evolution. It's speculative, it's controversial, but it fits the pattern. Knowledge appearing suddenly, without clear precedent, transforming human society overnight. And then there's the matter of modern UFO phenomena. For decades, governments around the world denied the existence of unexplained aerial phenomena. They dismissed sightings as weather balloons, swamp gas, mass hallucinations. But in recent years, that's changed. In 2017, the New York Times published a bombshell article revealing that the U.S. Department of Defense had been secretly investigating UFOs through a program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The Pentagon released videos, filmed by Navy pilots, showing objects moving in ways that defy known physics. Objects accelerating instantly, making right-angle turns at high speed, hovering without visible propulsion, descending from 80,000 feet to sea level in seconds. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released an official report on unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs. The report acknowledged 144 incidents between 2004 and 2021 and admitted that most could not be explained. The objects displayed, the report said, unusual flight characteristics and advanced technology. Pilots, trained observers with no reason to lie, describe encounters with craft that outperform anything in the human arsenal. Former Pentagon officials, intelligence officers, and military personnel have testified before Congress, stating that these objects are real, that they've been tracked on radar and infrared, that they represent technology beyond our current understanding. Some of these objects have been seen near nuclear facilities, military bases, and aircraft carriers. In some cases, they've interfered with weapons systems, disabling missiles and radar. In other cases, they've simply observed, hovering silently, before accelerating away at impossible speeds. Who or what is piloting these craft? The report doesn't say. It offers no conclusions, only acknowledgement, but the implication is clear. We are not alone, and whoever they are, they've been watching us for a long time. This brings us back to the Anunnaki. If extraterrestrial beings visited Earth in ancient times, if they influenced human development, if they were remembered as gods, why would they stop? Why would they leave and never return? Maybe they didn't. Maybe they've been here all along, watching, waiting, occasionally intervening. The UFO phenomena, the abduction accounts, the sightings reported by credible witnesses could be the modern continuation of an ancient relationship. The gods didn't leave. We just stopped calling them gods. There's also the mystery of ancient DNA. In 2010, scientists announced that modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA, evidence of interbreeding between species. In 2017, researchers discovered that some human populations carry DNA from an unknown hominin, a ghost species with no fossil record. We interbred with something, but we don't know what. Could this unknown DNA be evidence of hybridization? Not with another human species, but with something else. It sounds like science fiction, but geneticists are genuinely puzzled. There are segments of human DNA whose origin is unclear, whose function is unknown, whose presence is unexplained. Then there's the WOW signal, detected in 1977 by a radio telescope scanning for extraterrestrial transmissions. The signal lasted 72 seconds, was far stronger than background noise, and came from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. It matched the expected signature of an artificial, extraterrestrial signal. It has never been detected again, and no natural explanation has been confirmed. Astronomers continue searching, listening, hoping for another message. And every so often, there's a blip, a candidate, a moment of excitement, but nothing definitive, just silence. Or maybe not silence. Maybe we're not listening in the right way. The Anunnaki story suggests that the search for extraterrestrial life shouldn't be focused on distant stars. It should be focused here, on Earth, in our past, in our myths, in our DNA. Maybe they've already been here. Maybe they left traces. Maybe those traces are the monuments, the texts, the stories we've been trying to understand for centuries. Or maybe the skeptics are right. Maybe it's all coincidence, misinterpretation, wishful thinking. Maybe humans are alone, and always have been. But the questions remain, the mysteries endure, and as long as they do, the story of the Anunnaki will continue to captivate, disturb, and inspire us. Chapter 11. The Forbidden Knowledge. Throughout history, there has always been knowledge reserved for the few, secrets guarded by priests, kings, and scholars, information deemed too dangerous, too powerful, too sacred for common people. The ancient world was built on hierarchies of knowledge, and at the top sat those who claimed to speak with the gods. In ancient Egypt, the priests of the mystery schools held knowledge passed down from the time of the gods, or so they claimed. They understood astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and architecture. They performed rituals in hidden chambers beneath the temples, initiating only the worthy into the deeper mysteries. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, the pyramid texts, these were not meant for public consumption. They were guides for the elite, instructions for navigating the afterlife, encoded wisdom that required years of study to comprehend. The Greeks inherited this tradition. Pythagoras, after studying in Egypt and Babylon, founded his own mystery school in southern Italy. His followers, the Pythagoreans, swore oaths of secrecy, guarding mathematical and philosophical knowledge as sacred. They believed that numbers were the language of the universe, that geometry revealed divine truth, that certain knowledge, if misused, could upset the cosmic order. Plato wrote about Atlantis, a lost civilization of immense power and wisdom, destroyed by the gods for its arrogance. He claimed to have learned the story from Egyptian priests, who told him it was ancient even in their time. Was Atlantis myth or memory? Plato presented it as history, not allegory, and for 2,000 years, scholars have debated whether he was describing a real place. In Mesopotamia, the scribes who copied the ancient Sumerian tablets were the gatekeepers of knowledge. They decided what was preserved and what was lost. They controlled access to the stories of the gods, the king lists, the creation epics, and they, like the Egyptian priests, claimed their knowledge came from the Anunnaki, passed down through generations, protected from the ignorant masses. But knowledge, once recorded, is difficult to destroy completely. Even when empires fall, when libraries burn, fragments survive. Hidden in caves, buried in ruins, copied by monks, smuggled across borders, the knowledge persists. The Library of Alexandria was one of the greatest repositories of ancient wisdom. Founded in the 3rd century BC, it housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, texts from Greece, Egypt, Persia, India, Babylon. Scholars traveled from across the known world to study there. It was the intellectual heart of the ancient world. And then it burned. Or rather, it was destroyed over time, through neglect, war, and religious purges. By the 5th century AD, it was gone. And with it, an incalculable amount of knowledge was lost forever. How much did we lose? What secrets were written on those scrolls? What ancient histories, what scientific treatises, what maps and star charts vanished into ash? We know that some of the lost works were extraordinary. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy. Aristarchus proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system, 17 centuries before Copernicus. Archimedes designed machines that seemed almost magical, weapons that could set ships on fire from a distance using mirrors and sunlight. These weren't myths. These were real achievements, documented by historians, and then lost. What else was lost? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that the library contained texts describing the Anunnaki, detailing their technology, their history, their relationship with humanity. These texts, if they existed, would have been seen as heretical, dangerous, incompatible with the rising dominance of Christianity and Islam, and so they were destroyed, deliberately, to ensure that the old knowledge would not threaten the new order. The Vatican Library, one of the oldest and most secretive archives in the world, is rumored to contain documents that would rewrite history. The Vatican Secret Archives, recently rebranded as the Vatican Apostolic Archives, hold over 50 miles of shelving filled with letters, papal bulls, state papers, and ancient manuscripts. Most of it is inaccessible to the public. Scholars can request access to specific documents, but they must know what they're looking for, and even then, permission is rarely granted. What's in there? The Vatican says it's mostly administrative records, correspondence, nothing exciting. But conspiracy theorists believe otherwise. They speculate that the archives contain suppressed gospels, texts that contradict official church doctrine, evidence of extraterrestrial contact, records of miracles that were too strange to publicize. The church, they argue, has spent centuries controlling information, deciding what the world is allowed to know. Is this true? We don't know. We're not allowed to look. And that, in itself, is suspicious. Then there's the mystery of ancient texts that were suppressed or ignored. The Book of Enoch, for example, was excluded from the Bible, deemed too strange, too controversial. It describes the Watchers, the Nephilim, the forbidden knowledge given to humanity. Early Christians read it, quoted it, believed it, but later church authorities rejected it, and it was lost to the Western world for over 1,000 years, preserved only by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Why was it suppressed? Because it challenged the narrative. It suggested that angels could sin, that divine beings could mate with humans, that there were secrets heaven didn't want humanity to know. It was too close to the Anunnaki story, too similar to the idea that gods walked among us and shaped our destiny. In the Islamic world, there are stories of the jinn, beings of smokeless fire, created by Allah before humans. The jinn have free will, live in a parallel dimension, and occasionally interact with humans. Some are good, others evil. They possess knowledge beyond human understanding, and certain humans, magicians and prophets, could communicate with them, commanding them to reveal secrets. Are the jinn another name for the Anunnaki? Another cultural memory of non-human intelligences that existed alongside humanity, influencing it, sometimes helping, sometimes harming. The theme repeats across cultures. The Vedas of India speak of the Devas and Asuras, divine beings who warred in the heavens and on earth. The Popol Vuh of the Maya describes gods who created and destroyed humanity multiple times, experimenting until they got it right. The Aboriginal Australians speak of the Dreamtime, when ancestral beings shaped the world and gave humans the law. All of these are dismissed as mythology, as folklore, as the superstitious imaginings of primitive people. But what if they're not? What if their history, filtered through the lens of time, distorted but not invented? What if the forbidden knowledge is simply the truth we've forgotten, or been told to forget? In the modern era, governments have their own secret archives, classified documents, redacted files, information hidden behind walls of national security. The CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon, all of them hold records that the public is not allowed to see. And occasionally, through leaks or declassification, fragments emerge. In the 1990s, the CIA declassified documents related to remote viewing, a program that attempted to use psychic abilities for espionage. The military tested whether trained individuals could see distant locations, read documents in locked rooms, gather intelligence through paranormal means. The official conclusion was that the program was unreliable, but it ran for over 20 years and cost millions of dollars. Would they have continued if there were no results? More recently, the Pentagon has acknowledged studying UFOs, admitting that objects of unknown origin have been encountered by military personnel. They've released videos. They've testified before Congress. But they haven't released everything. There are reports, radar data, pilot testimonies that remain classified. Why? What are they protecting? What do they know that we don't? The pattern is always the same. Knowledge is controlled. Those in power decide what we're allowed to learn. And the most dangerous knowledge, the knowledge that challenges the established order, is hidden, suppressed, or destroyed. The Anunnaki story is dangerous because it suggests that humanity is not the pinnacle of creation, that we were made by others, that we are not alone, that we never have been. It undermines religious authority, questions scientific consensus, and opens the door to possibilities that most institutions would rather keep closed. But the door is cracked, and through that crack, light is beginning to seep in. People are asking questions, researchers are digging, documents are being leaked, and slowly, the forbidden knowledge is becoming accessible again. The question is, are we ready for it? Chapter 12. They never left. Or did they? The Sumerian tablets tell us that the Anunnaki came to Earth, that they created humanity, that they ruled as gods for thousands of years. But then, at some point, they stopped. The gods withdrew. The temples fell silent. The divine kings were replaced by mortal rulers. The Anunnaki, it seemed, had left. Or had they? In the later Mesopotamian texts, there are hints that the gods didn't simply vanish. They retreated. They ascended to the heavens, but they watched. They continued to influence events, sending omens, speaking through priests, occasionally intervening in human affairs. The relationship changed, but it didn't end. The Epic of Gilgamesh ends with the hero's failure to achieve immortality. He returns to Uruk, defeated, aging, mortal. But the gods remain. And the final lines of the epic are a reminder that the walls of Uruk, the great city, were built by divine hands, or at least with divine guidance. The gods' legacy endures, even if they are no longer physically present. In the biblical tradition, God speaks to Adam and Eve, walks in the garden, wrestles with Jacob, appears as a burning bush to Moses. But over time, the direct appearances become rarer. By the time of the prophets, God speaks through visions and dreams, not face to face. And by the New Testament, God is distant, transcendent, no longer walking among humans. This mirrors the Anunnaki story. Direct contact decreases over time. The gods become myths, symbols, theological concepts, but the memory remains. Ancient astronaut theorists propose several explanations for the gods' departure. One possibility is that the Anunnaki completed their mission. They came to Earth for resources, created a workforce to extract those resources, and once the task was done, they left. Humanity was set on a path, given the tools and knowledge to develop on its own, and the Anunnaki moved on to other projects, other worlds. Another possibility is that the Anunnaki were forced to leave. Perhaps there was a war among them, a conflict that spilled across the solar system. Perhaps Nibiru's orbit carried them away, and they could not return. Or perhaps Earth became too dangerous, too unpredictable, and they decided humanity was no longer worth the risk. Zecharia Sitchin believed the Anunnaki would return. He pointed to ancient prophecies, to cyclical patterns in history, to the 3,600-year orbital period of Nibiru. According to his calculations, Nibiru was due to return in the early 21st century. Some of his followers believed this would happen around 2012, connecting it to the Mayan calendar's end date, sparking a wave of apocalyptic predictions. 2012 came and went. Nothing happened. Skeptics declared the theory dead. But true believers adjusted their timelines, recalculated, argued that the return would be gradual, not sudden, that the signs were already appearing. And in a way, they are. Not signs of Nibiru, but signs of something. The increase in UFO sightings, the government's sudden willingness to acknowledge the phenomenon, the rapid advancement of technology, the sense that humanity is approaching a threshold, a moment of transformation. Some ancient astronaut theorists believe the Anunnaki never left at all. They simply went underground, or into hiding, watching from a distance, occasionally making contact through chosen individuals. They point to stories of secret societies, shadowy groups with ancient knowledge, bloodlines that trace back to the gods. The Illuminati, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, all rumored to possess secrets passed down through the centuries. These theories blend into conspiracy, into speculation that's difficult to verify. But the core idea is compelling. What if the gods are still here, hidden, manipulating events, guiding humanity towards some unknown purpose? Then there's the question of what the Anunnaki wanted. If they created humanity, why? Not just for labor, surely. Once humans became independent, once civilizations rose, once we developed our own technology, we no longer needed them. So why keep watching? Why keep intervening? One possibility is that humanity is an experiment, a long-term study in biology, culture, evolution. The Anunnaki, or whoever they are scientists, observing how an intelligent species develops, how it solves problems, how it deals with technology, war, and existential threats. We are a petri dish, and they are the researchers, taking notes. Another possibility is that humanity has a purpose we don't yet understand. Perhaps we were created to eventually join the Anunnaki, to evolve into something greater, to become their equals or successors. Perhaps Earth is a nursery, and when we reach a certain level of development, we will be welcomed into a larger galactic community. Or perhaps the truth is darker. Perhaps humanity is a resource, not for gold or labor, but for something else. Some researchers have proposed that the Anunnaki feed on human emotion, on fear, worship, suffering. This idea appears in various mystical and occult traditions. The concept of entities that feed on energy, on consciousness, on the spiritual essence of living beings. It's unsettling. It's difficult to prove or disprove, but it fits with certain patterns in history, the endless wars, the cycles of rise and fall, the sense that humanity is trapped in a loop, repeating the same mistakes, never quite breaking free. In recent decades, the idea of disclosure has gained traction. The belief that governments, particularly the United States, know far more about extraterrestrial contact than they've admitted, that there have been crashes, recovered craft, even recovered bodies, that agreements or treaties exist between world powers and non-human intelligences. In 2023, a former US intelligence officer testified before Congress, stating under oath that the government possesses intact and partially intact craft of non-human origin. He claimed there are programs, hidden within the military-industrial complex, dedicated to reverse engineering this technology. He alleged that some of these craft were recovered with biological entities, non-human pilots or crew. His testimony was explosive. It was covered by major media outlets. And then, like so many UFO stories, it faded from public attention. The government acknowledged his claims but provided no evidence, no confirmation. The cycle continues. Hints, leaks, testimony, and then silence. But the momentum is building. More whistleblowers are coming forward. More footage is being released. The stigma around the topic is fading. For the first time in history, serious scientists, politicians, and military personnel are openly discussing the possibility that we are not alone, that we have been visited, that contact is real. If the Anunnaki are real, if they're still watching, what do they think of us now? Have we met their expectations or disappointed them? Are we on the verge of rejoining them or on the verge of self-destruction? The ancient texts suggest that the gods were not omniscient. They made mistakes. They argued. They changed their minds. If the Anunnaki are watching us now, perhaps they're uncertain, just as we are. Perhaps they're wondering if humanity will survive, if we'll reach the stars, or if we'll destroy ourselves before we get the chance. In the end, the question of whether the Anunnaki left or stayed is less important than the question of what we do next. If we are the creation of advanced beings, if we carry their DNA, their knowledge, their legacy, then we have a choice. We can continue down the path of ignorance, division, and conflict. Or we can wake up, look to the stars, and ask the question our ancestors asked 6,000 years ago. Are we alone? Or are the gods still watching? And if they are, what will they see when they look at us? And so, our journey through the mystery of the Anunnaki comes to an end. Or perhaps it's just beginning. We've walked through the ruins of Sumer, deciphered clay tablets written in the oldest language, examined stones that shouldn't exist, and listened to stories that refuse to fade. We've heard the arguments of believers and skeptics, of scientists and dreamers. And still, the question remains unanswered. Were the Anunnaki gods myths woven from the human need to explain the unknown? Or were they visitors, ancient astronauts who shaped humanity and then departed, leaving only memories carved in stone and written in blood? Perhaps the truth lies not in certainty, but in possibility. Perhaps the answer is not meant to be found, but to be searched for. The mystery is the gift. It keeps us looking up, keeps us questioning, keeps us humble. The ancient Sumerians believed the gods walked among them, and maybe, in some way, they still do. Not in temples or tablets, but in the questions we ask, the wonders we seek, the refusal to accept easy answers. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey into the past, and perhaps into the future. Until our next exploration into the twilight, I wish you clear skies, curious minds, and the courage to ask the questions that matter. Good night.